Hey y'all, Scott here. Well, I've run out of physical goods to talk about in my apartment, now that you've repossessed everything else. But don't worry, I'll figure it out next week. I might slip the bag at 20. So I don't have anything left to talk about outside of who gives a shit. I got 8 minutes out of that, so I'll turn to drugs. Piracy, the gateway drug. I'm playing Mario 3 on my Mac. This time next week, you'll find me in a fucking ditch. What do you do when you can't buy and or play a game anymore? Give up! It's one of our 2 rights, to buy video games, then not to. Well, that's fair enough, but man, I just really want to play Four Swords Adventures, and I don't have a GameCube right now, so maybe just this once. I also killed a man. Emulation is often a word in the video game world with dirty connotations associated with it. It's like the word gimmick. That thing was forever ruined by the Wii and Kinect for Xbox 360. Now people think it's a bad thing. Like everything in gaming is a gimmick when you get down to it, and emulation is something that's been seen as immoral, lazy, pretty much everything under the sun. But what is emulation? Well, to start, immoral and lazy. So your video game runs on specific hardware. Good for it. An Xbox game is made to run on an Xbox, but what if you want to bring that game to future consoles? Well, you could port the game, which is taking the game and translating it over to another platform to work there. Though that can be a long process. Different systems are different systems, thus they can be incompatible, so getting code made for one game console to run on another, it can be incredibly tricky. There's no getting around that. So sometimes it may be more worthwhile and efficient to use emulation, which emulates specific video game hardware via software on different hardware. That was the last thing I told my parents before they kicked me out. Of course, for more complex and newer games, porting is most definitely the superior and often only option. You can fine-tune the game to work perfectly on a new platform, while emulation is more of a quick and dirty jack-of-all-trades solution for older systems. It takes a while to figure out how to code a program that makes a game file think it's running on a game console is meant to work on, which is why emulation is primarily used for games from older consoles, ones that programmers have pretty much completely figured out at this point. If you're bringing old school NES, Sega Genesis, Atari games to a new platform, these games are so unbelievably simple. Why would you port them? Why would you rebuild them from the ground up? Just use a Sega Genesis emulator. Drag and drop the game files and presto, here's $30 from a f***ing idiot. Emulation isn't always perfect. Things can go wrong because each game is created differently. A computer program designed to mimic very specific hardware, well, that's what it's doing. It's mimicking it. It's basically fooling this game file into thinking it's running on a Nintendo 64. So games that use unique effects and push the hardware a decent bit or add something special about them, those are generally outliers. For the longest time, Star Fox, Yoshi's Island, Super Mario RPG, these were SNES games that were really difficult to emulate, and it took a while to perfect SNES emulation to play them properly via this method. While our modern game consoles and computers are more than capable of running games from the Sega Saturn, it comes down to figuring out how to emulate the system properly. Some of these consoles are still incredibly difficult to figure out. Does this look understandable to you? So to wrap up the explanation, how about an analogy? Emulation is like telling a teenager that grape juice is wine. They might get drunk, it just depends on how stupid they are. Well then what's the issues with emulation? It seems like a go-to way to experience older games on newer hardware. Well, for one, the purity. This was the main argument I heard growing up. The idea that playing a classic game with an emulator, it doesn't count. If you play a game on anything but the original hardware, you didn't really play it. Yeah, the guy saying that also left the bathroom without washing his hands. So there's something along the lines of playing an NES game on your computer. You're not supposed to use the keyboard for these games. Yet nobody cares if you use a controller for computer games. Let's say something like the Nintendo Switch. If I play Zelda 2 on here, it's not the same experience. You're using a different controller. You're playing the game in a context that the game designers didn't even intend on. You're not playing the game correctly. Hey, I totally get it. Back in the day, I downloaded Super Mario Kart for the SNES on the Wii Virtual Console, and after playing it, I was just like, well, that definitely was the first Mario Kart, alright. I just couldn't see why many still held it in such high regards. But later on, I popped the official cartridge into an actual Super Nintendo and played with an authentic controller, and it clicked. Everything just felt right. The game was meant to be played this way, and because of that, it was way more fun. I think playing old school games like that with a modern controller can kind of give me whiplash. Like, it makes me feel like, man, I could be playing Mario Kart 8 on this thing right now, and instead I'm playing this piece of shit. Playing on the original hardware helps in understanding what the game is trying to achieve. It allows you to immerse yourself in the context of playing the game as it was intended. That's not to say I can't enjoy old games on new platforms. Far from it, I prefer it. It's so much more convenient. It's just the playing with the actual cartridge and system and controller. it just feels right. Playing an NES game on Switch makes me ask, what the hell am I doing with my life? Playing an NES game on an actual NES with an original controller, it feels like you're appreciating history. It's like listening to vinyl. Sure, it's more effort to do it that way, but it feels so much more genuine. However, emulation does have a ton of benefits. One being video output. It can look a million times better than most conventional ways of playing on the original system. Yes, I do like to see the game. Pixel perfect visuals. It's so crisp now. This is horrible for Atari. You ever play any of these Atari compilations when they're in crystal clear HD and it just makes you realize how stupid you feel while playing these games? Guess what I'm playing with an Xbox controller. Why, yes, I'm f***ing stupid. These games can run on milk jugs. There's no reason why they shouldn't be available on modern consoles, though I still think they work best hooked up to an old TV with a fuzzy picture. Like, man, this doesn't look right. Some games just work best with limitations like that. When you're given all the options in the world to make Super Breakout your own, it almost kind of ruins the fun in that game. And that's how many people feel about the added bonus features that come with many emulators. Save stage! You can save and resume wherever you want in the game. You don't have to wait for a moment in the title itself. It's a system-wide feature. Just save and the emulator holds your place and you can pick up exactly where you left off. And some consider this cheating. I consider it an open relationship. Hey, here's the thing. Do you really think most of the developers chose not to include save files in the games? Or do you really think they knew back then what an adequate amount of save points would be if they did have save files? I think this is mainly an argument for retro gamers who feel games have gotten too easy these days, but does that easiness stem from being able to save? It's more of just something that deserves to be there. Like, imagine a DVD player without a pause button because, well, you couldn't pause the movie in the theater. So the fact these emulators include saving options, that's not right. You gotta play through the game as it was intended. Are you guys really acting like you never got help playing games in the 80s and 90s? Are you really acting like you didn't look at maps and guides in Nintendo Power, or acting like you didn't get help from friends on the schoolyard, or use Game Genie to mess around with the games or input cheat codes? Bottom line, if you don't want to use save states, good for you, but who the hell cares? They're nothing but a good option to have, though I think the main argument is about abusing them. You can save your game right before a super tough part and just keep reloading that save point until you get it right. Hey, to be fair, if you abuse save states and use them constantly, chances are you're gonna save state yourself into a corner. Like, you save at a part where a billion projectiles are already on their way to you, and once you load at the save point, bam! Oh, I am scum. I find myself using save states not because I can't do what the game is asking me to. I just don't want to put up with its garbage. I don't want to waste time playing through a bunch of levels I've already beaten without save states all over again just to get to one part of the game I have trouble with. Hey, that's a part of the game design if you have to replay levels, but in many of these cases, I'm not trying to beat the game for a sense of accomplishment, I just want to beat it to experience it. So I think save states are fine if used in moderation. Rewinding is for bitches. Another staple of emulators is the rewind functionality, being able to rewind from wherever you are to wherever you were. Who would use this? Bitches. This is pretty much an easier to use save state and was born out of the fact a lot of these retro games are just unfair. Yeah, try saying that in court. Hey, I 100% think this is being a bit cheap sometimes, but my god, it's so hard to ignore. I'll play a game for a while before using it, but then there's that one portion where I'm just like, okay, I beat everything up to this point. I can obviously do it. It's just, let me use it to get past this. And then I proceed to use it for the rest of the game. It's so evil, but it's such a nice quality of life improvement. Ah! What about the fast forward feature? The Sega Genesis Classics collection has that. Helps me die way sooner. You can consistently change and add filters and change how the game looks with emulation. Some people like the pixels all smoothed out. Some things like the pixels all smoothed out. Oh, look at that, a CRT filter, making it look like it's on an old TV. I understand the value in something like this. These types of monitors are what these games are designed for, though filters like this feel very patronizing to me. Like, what do you think, I'm a fucking idiot? No, I need the pixel smooth, stretched widescreen, mirrored image, TV projection, plus the CRT filter. Can you tell I have standards? Button mapping. You can change where the buttons are. I think this is a feature that should be standard on literally everything. Like, wait. Do I have to hit the A button for this? Why not the X button? Why not the L button, for Christ's sake? Sure, some games are fully designed around where the button is. I remember Heavy Rain, when the character would be in stressful situations where you had to carefully move between dangerous objects, you have to hold multiple buttons in awkward places, which really immersed me. Alright, that's enough sucking Heavy Rain off. Some button placements just don't work for people, especially when you're emulating a game from a different console. That controller may not be up to snuff. So being able to change that, I think is important. Sure, many of these additions may make the game feel less as it originally did, But is that really a bad thing? More often than not, most emulation efforts give you solutions to play the game nearly just as it was always intended, if not entirely. If you don't want to play with save states, rewind features, widescreen, any of that, you don't have to! But these features can only really help the games. Many times emulators can in fact reduce slowdown, increase frame rate, enable 16:9 so you can see what the hell's going on here. And of course that raises questions. Slowdown stinks, but that was how the game was made. If you take the slowdown out of Sonic 2, is it still Sonic 2? Might be a dumb question, but what about for stuff like speedruns, competitions? Using these enhanced versions should always be specified. But at what point do these additive enhancements become too much? The benefits emulators bring, they would have been enough to make this version of a game its own separate game back then. Bottom line, emulation seems pretty simple, but the more you go down it, there's hundreds upon hundreds of questions that have yet to get definitive answers. And a lot of it is completely down to your own individual opinion. Like, I think Nintendo 64 games in widescreen look disgusting. I don't like them, but do I care that other people do and they only ever want to play Nintendo 64 games like this? No, but so many people do. It's like they get really mad if somebody says they beat Mega Man 2, but on an emulator they go, no, I beat Mega Man 2. What, do NBA fans get pissed off when they see somebody play on the playground? Who cares? Play games the way you want to play games, and if that means playing via emulation on your fancy new controller with save states, or if that means playing on the original hardware, so be it. There's nothing wrong. Still in prison, man. Yes, one of the biggest problems with emulation is the legality of it. Now, the stuff I've been referring to up to this point have all been mostly relegated to official emulation, games officially made available by the legal copyright owners on video game hardware. Nintendo's Virtual Console, or NES, SNES, Nintendo 64 Switch Online services, Sega's various Genesis collections, Sony's PlayStation 1 games on PS3 and Vita, and all the other collections and re-releases, the mini consoles like the NES and SNES Classic Edition, PlayStation Classic, Sega Genesis Mini, they all use emulation to provide you with an experience as close to the original games as possible, mostly. But that's not even half the story with emulation, as most of it occurs on my worst fucking nightmare. Some of it happens on Mac, what are you talking about? All those emulator features that I discussed, it's completely up in the air if they appear in official video game consoles, and most of the time, they don't. You're lucky if you get a CRT filter. Emulators on PC are decades ahead, and have been for a while. You can truly do anything with them. Play fan games, ROM hacks, use custom save files to get farther in the game without playing. You can toggle between dozens of options on the fly. Plus, having choices, you can pick and choose what emulator for what system you want to use, and you can play any way you want. Games are games. Everybody has their own rules for Monopoly. Why can't Super Mario Bros. 3 be the same? I own this game. I should be able to do whatever I want with it. And if I want the frog suit in World 1-1, that's my own business. It's so frustrating with many official releases that they don't give you the options fan emulators give. Super Mario 3D All-Stars included emulated versions of Super Mario 64 and Sunshine. Sunshine was put in 16:9 widescreen, while 64 was still 4:3, which I still don't understand. Yes, I don't like Nintendo 64 games in widescreen, but even I don't get this. It's more than possible. Fans have been doing this for years. Just the option would have been cool. It's all about control. Nintendo wants their experiences on their platforms to be a certain way. It seems like they want playing a Nintendo system to be like walking into Disneyland. Like, you've entered the world of Nintendo. Do you want to toggle off bilinear filters? They don't want that. We're lucky we're at the point we are with them. Emulators themselves on PC aren't illegal, but they're pretty much worthless unless you have game ROM files to play on them, and the only way to do that is to serve 6 to 7 years. This is the main crutch of PC emulation. Obtaining games to play, yeah, by all means do it. I'm sure the core would love to hear your story. Piracy, that's the main argument. You're downloading game files illegally to play on your computer. Well, what if I own a legal copy of the game? Then can I do it? Nope. These are two separate copies. Owning one hose reel doesn't give you the legal right to steal another. However, who the hell cares? Most of these games aren't being sold anymore. There's no official way to buy them. The only method is getting a copy secondhand on eBay, and that's not going to any of the original copyright holders. It's an incredibly tricky thing to figure out. So much of this is in a legal gray area, or is in a specifically illegal area, but you're not hurting any profits or anybody or anything by dabbling in it. Or is in a legal area, but you can't do anything with it. Sure, you can get an emulator, but playing games on it, no thank you. But these emulators, man, even if you can play a legal copy of a game on a legal system easily, emulators like Dolphin can give you GameCube and Wii games in far greater resolutions with new control options, better frame rates. It's difficult to look at this compared to the official, completely legal method and really consider this better. However, we need to make things clear. Emulation on PC can be a nightmare. You know how much work it took me to play the Wii version of Sonic Colors on the PC? Enough to say, f*** you, I'll buy Sonic Colors Ultimate instead. The amount of work required to get a lot of this running is ridiculous. Even the easiest ones, the types of websites you have to go on to download ROMs, are the ones my mom always warned me about. Half the time, the emulator doesn't work and you don't know why, and if anything, it just goes to show that putting out simply emulated versions of old games on consoles officially, it still takes a lot of work. And while fan emulation can be outstanding, at the end of the day, I'd rather just officially purchase the games on the consoles when they become available by the copyright holders, because, frankly, I'm too lazy and stupid to break the law. And it makes it all worse that companies like Nintendo are so hell-bent on putting a stop to anything of this nature. But you know what? They have the right to do so. They don't want their games to be pirated. But if they don't want that, offer your damn games on your system! Nintendo re-releases their games all the time, but they're mostly the same things over and over again. What about the games that never get a re-release? The Virtual Boy catalog, or even more so, the Satellaview games. Games broadcasted the add-on for the Super Famicom in Japan only. These games were only available for a certain amount of time, have never been re-released, and are preserved online through emulation. And that's something emulation does, and it does well. Preservation, and the stance against emulation has hurt it significantly. Whether it's because the idea of emulation isn't the true experience, and if you emulate games you're not truly playing them, or the legal battles against them, or just the fact that if an official video game re-release uses emulation, it's somewhat frowned upon, it doesn't matter. Emulation has a weird stigma. When I hear that a re-release was emulated, it usually is considered just emulation, like it's a bad thing. Oh no, this collection of games was merely emulated. They were imported natively to the platform. You do realize nobody notices most of the time? I gladly welcome more effort, but sometimes emulation works perfectly. There's no need to go further than that. And complaining about it is just another excuse to complain about some games. No, they just emulated it. Well, that's not always a bad thing. Some remasters or remakes of games, I'd honestly prefer it if they just re-released an emulated version of the original. That way I know exactly what I'm getting. Emulation can be bad sometimes, 100%. There's kind of a one-size-fits-all mentality with it. Emulating a console, one game may work great for it, others may not. But like I said, even bad emulation, most of the time people don't notice. Sonic Jam on the Sega Saturn rebuilt the original Genesis games from the ground up. They fixed slowdown and improved the games here and there, but they primarily felt the exact same. Sonic Mega Collection used emulated versions. Most people never noticed, I'm telling you now. Still doesn't stop Sega from constantly putting effort into finding new ways to re-release Sonic 1. Am I the only one that gets kinda pissed off at the amount of man-hours put into re-releasing this game? Oh, the Sega Ages version of Sonic 1 is so much better than the version in the Sega Genesis Classics collection. It's the same damn game! I normally prefer my games pretty stock. I don't like to mess with the visuals or controls too much, but that doesn't mean I think the option shouldn't be there for those who don't want that. And while I prefer to play games on console, the emulation on PC is a situation where you can't really blame people for doing it. It's the superior option in many ways, and I'm worried that the stance against it just keeps it from being the asset it's meant to be. This is supposed to help gaming, to help more people experience it, to help preserve it, to help people play games the way they want to play them. And companies going after stuff like this, or people frowning upon official releases using emulation when it's completely warranted to use it, it just keeps retro gaming way more inaccessible than it needs to be. Plus, who the hell actually went to jail over downloading a ROM? At the end of the day, just do what you want. Gotcha.